Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling something, well, pretty heavy, but incredibly important. We're looking at a pattern, a mechanism, really, that seems to repeat itself throughout history.
Right? How movements that start with these big promises, unity, justice, belonging.
Exactly. Based on identity, religion, race, ideology, you name it.
How they seem to almost inevitably narrow down.
Yeah, they become rigid, exclusive, even authoritarian. It's a predictable path, isn't it?
It really seems to be. And that's the focus, using the work, particularly Burke's analysis, almost like a lighthouse.
A lighthouse, I like that.
Yeah, shining a light on these dangerous historical patterns, identifying how prioritizing a specific belief or identity over just basic human dignity
Leads to some really negative, predictable places.
It's that paradox, isn't it? The search for moral renewal somehow flipping into, well, moral collapse.
So the core idea we're digging into, the thesis from the material, is pretty stark.
It is. It says that for societies to have any real shot at sustained peace and equity,
The highest organizing principle has to be humanity itself, our shared value.
not religion, not color, not ideology, if any of those narrower things get put on top.
The system essentially starts down a path of self-destruction.
That's the argument. So we need to trace that road
From that initial, often exciting dream.
to the reality of control often felt by the very people who believed in the dream the most.
Okay, let's get into it. Part one. Those beginnings, they often feel so inclusive, right?
Absolutely. That initial pull is incredibly strong.
Think about it when things feel unstable, uncertain, unjust.
These movements offer something very attractive.
A clear identity, you know who you are.
A sense of direction, a purpose,
The promise of justice, fixing what's wrong.
and this feeling of moral purity, being on the right side.
And maybe most powerful of all, that deep sense of belonging. You're not alone anymore.
Exactly. And this initial phase, it's often described in terms of this intense shared emotion.
Like a kind of collective high.
Sort of. The source material brings up Durkheim's idea of collective effervescence.
Ah, right, from his work on religion.
Yeah. It's that moment, that feeling where isolated individuals just fuse.
They become part of this shared moral consciousness.
It's exhilarating, apparently. You feel connected, vital, part of something huge.
Something historic,
Yeah,
maybe even sacred.
Yeah.
Much bigger than just yourself.
precisely. You feel like you're contributing to this grand dusting.
Okay, let's unpack this then. This initial unity, this shared moral purpose, it feels so incredibly positive, so powerful.
It is powerful.
So if it starts with ideals like justice, how does that energy, which is all about bringing people together, end up being the very thing that drives them apart?
Well, that's the tragic twist. The source argues that the very intensity that unites everyone, it also kind of blinds them.
Blinds them. How?
When the focus is the absolute purity of the goal, the absolute necessity of the cause, people tend to overlook the immediate human costs.
They stop seeing the ethical compromises needed right now because they're so focused on that perfect future.
Exactly. It's like they're staring at this distant utopia and they don't see the messy, sometimes morally gray steps right in front of them.
That intense moral vision becomes a kind of tunnel vision.
Yeah. And that leads us straight to the critical turning point, the hinge.
The point where it shifts from potential fellowship to,
Yeah.
well, inevitable hierarchy.
That's it. It all comes down to the nature of the bond holding the group together.
What do you mean, the nature of the bond?
Is the primary connection based on unconditional humanity, the idea that everyone deserves respect just by virtue of being human.
If it is, then it's genuinely inclusive.
Right. But, and this is the key, if that primary bond shifts to conformity.
Conformity, like you only belong if.
Exactly. If you follow the sacred text perfectly, if you belong to the right ethnic group, if you toe the ideological line without question,
Then that promise of inclusion, it wasn't real.
it becomes conditional. It's a trapdoor, really. You're welcome, but
So the very thing that drew people in, that deep desire to belong,
it gets turned against them. It quickly morphs into intense pressure to conform.
because if the group's destiny or purity is the absolute top priority,
Then individual thought, individual moral judgment starts to look dangerous. Questioning becomes disloyalty.
and what started as this warm, welcoming fellowship,
Subtly but inevitably transforms into a rigid moral hierarchy.
where some people are more equal than others.
Essentially, yes. Those who demonstrate the most conformity, the most doctrinal purity, the most unquestioning loyalty, they rise.
They're seen as more right, more worthy.
And everyone else feels the pressure to emulate them, to prove their own worthiness within the group.
Wow. So the moment you define that perfect ideal,
You automatically define the imperfect other.
and then the main job becomes policing that line, making sure everyone stays pure.
That becomes the movement's new focus, yeah. It overshadows the original goals, like justice or equality.
And that policing, that need to enforce the line, that requires structure, doesn't it? It can't just be passion anymore.
Precisely. It needs rules, roles, enforcement. It needs to institutionalize, and that's the gateway to power consolidation.
Okay, so the line of purity is drawn. The group needs to maintain itself, keep that energy going, but also control it.
Right. As it gains success, maybe political influence or cultural dominance, it has to become more organized. It institutionalizes.
And this is where the leaders step in and basically change the rules of belonging.
They redefine inclusion. It's no longer about shared hope. It's about adherence to a strict set of rules and doctrines.
There's a connection here to Max Weber's work, isn't there? His warnings about charismatic movements.
Yes, absolutely. Weber pointed out that these movements, built on that initial passionate connection to a leader or an idea, they're inherently unstable.
That fire, that collective effervescence we talked about, it can't last forever.
It's transient, it fades, or the leader dies, or the initial crisis passes. And power doesn't like instability.
So to survive, the movement has to preserve that power.
And Weber called this the routinization of authority. That initial charismatic energy gets channeled, formalized, controlled.
Bureaucracy sets in. Rules, dogma.
Exactly. The spirit kind of gets sacrificed so the structure can survive. Faith isn't just belief anymore. It becomes codified rule. Devotion isn't voluntary. It becomes enforced duty.
The system takes over, managing itself, and that management is all about maintaining control. How does this shift show up in the language the group uses? Does that change too?
Oh, dramatically. Language becomes engineered to fit the new structure.
So that stops meaning everyone.
We stops being universal or even aspirational. It becomes an exclusive label. It means only those who strictly follow the new rules, the dogma.
And what about the outsiders?
That's where the shift is most dangerous. They aren't just people who disagree anymore or people outside the group. They're actively redefined as threats to the group's purity, its destiny, maybe even its very existence.
Wow. Why is framing the outsider as an existential threat so important for this kind of control?
Because an existential threat justifies everything.
Right. Surveillance, silencing dissent.
Mandatory obedience, the hierarchy itself. If the danger is absolute and coming from outside, then any internal disagreement looks like treason.
So obedience to the leaders, the ones who interpret the threat, becomes the only safe path.
It's presented as the only way to survive.
What's really fascinating here and kind of chilling is how identity itself changes its function.
How so?
It stops being just descriptive, describing shared traits, who we are.
And becomes?
It becomes prescriptive. It dictates what you must do, what you must think, how you must act to even be considered part of the group.
So your worth is now measured by how well you perform the identity according to the rules.
Exactly. It can dictate everything: how you dress, who you talk to, what books you read.
Even what you're supposed to feel or believe internally.
Yeah. And the source points out that the whole moral center of the movement shifts.
From empathy towards exclusion.
Yes. Away from universal compassion and towards policing the boundaries, making sure everyone conforms.
And that ability to think for yourself morally, discernment, judging situations with reason and compassion.
That gets replaced entirely by just devotion. Unquestioning devotion to the structure, to the dogma.
Because the structure supposedly holds all the answers now.
Right. The message becomes, stop thinking critically for yourself. We, the leadership, the structure, have the moral truth.
And once people surrender that individual moral inquiry,
the door is wide open for exploitation, especially by those who benefit materially from the system.
The economic elites find fertile ground.
Okay, so the ideology is solidifying into this rigid hierarchy. We've got rules, duties, the in-group defined.
And the outsiders defined as threats.
Now, to keep this whole thing running smoothly, the source says you need two things working together.
Right. You need sincere, deep belief from the rank and file.
The masses who are truly devoted.
And you need effective material enforcement and, frankly, manipulation from the top.
And this is where the economic power players really start to leverage that spiritual or ideological fervor, isn't it?
Absolutely. They see this mass devotion, this collective energy, as an incredible tool.
A tool for what? Just consolidating their own power.
And disguising it. This connects to Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony.
Hegemony.
Yeah.
Meaning the ruling class doesn't just rule by force.
No, they shape the society's values, its norms, its common sense so effectively.
That their own dominance, their economic and political power, starts to look natural, like it's just the way things are supposed to be.
Or even that it's just and righteous. They don't need tanks in the streets if everyone believes their position is deserved or ordained.
So how do they pull that off? How do they disguise their power and wealth?
The sources detail this key mechanism, distraction and reframing.
Okay.
Extreme wealth and influence among the leadership elite isn't presented as inequality or exploitation.
It's presented
As divine favor, a sign of God's blessing. Or, in a more secular nationalist movement, it's framed as proof of their superior patriotic virtue or competence.
so their success isn't seen as taking from others, but as proof that the system itself is righteous and working.
Exactly. It shields them from criticism. How can you criticize someone who is clearly blessed or exceptionally virtuous?
But wait a second. The majority of people in these movements are often the poor, the devout, the ones not benefiting materially. How do the leaders stop them from seeing the glaring contradiction, their own hardship versus the elite's divine favor?
By controlling the interpretation, the elite appoint themselves as the sole legitimate interpreters of the moral truth, the divine will, or the national destiny.
So if you believe they are the only ones who truly understand God's plan or the ideology,
then their wealth isn't a contradiction. It's just a tool given to them by God or fate to manage the important work, the cause.
the authority of the interpreter dissolves the material inconsistency.
Precisely. And this leads to that tragic situation where the masses, the poor, the devout, the true believers who form the movement's backbone,
They end up becoming instruments of their own subjugation.
they work tirelessly, sacrifice, maybe even suffer economically, believing they're building this better world or serving a sacred cause.
When in reality, they're primarily just building the power base and protecting the wealth of the handful of people at the very top.
The cost to them is enormous, but they don't see it that way.
And this reliance on the elite interpreter, this leads to what the source calls the active cultivation of ignorance.
Yes, and this is crucial. It's not about people being unintelligent or uneducated in a general sense.
It's a specific kind of ignorance.
It's described as a condition of trust without verification.
Trust without verification, meaning
The followers are actively discouraged, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, from applying critical thinking or seeking outside evidence to check the movement's claims or the leader's actions.
because questioning would be a sign of weak faith or disloyalty.
Exactly. If you truly believe the leadership is divinely chosen, or racially superior, or ideologically infallible, then you don't need to look at the bank accounts, or question the political deals, or examine the ethical compromises. To do so would be heresy or treason.
So what does that look like day to day? How does this trust without verification keep the system stable?
People police themselves. They actively avoid information that contradicts the official narrative.
They dismiss critics, maybe even silence neighbors who ask awkward questions.
They might see the leaders living in luxury, but genuinely believe their own poverty is a spiritual test, while the leader's wealth is just a sign of their favor with God or destiny.
They become so deeply convinced of their own righteousness and the system's correctness.
That they actively defend the very structures, the economic inequality, the political control that are ultimately keeping them down.
So ignorance, in this very specific sense, becomes the elite's most powerful ally.
It's the operational bedrock. When the fear of being labeled impure or disloyal becomes stronger than the fear of being exploited or impoverished,
The system achieves a kind of perfect, self-perpetuating stability.
the masses become the guardians of the elite's power, defending it against any rational challenge.
Okay, so the control tightens, the hierarchy is locked in, the elites are benefiting, and ignorance is actively nurtured.
The system seems stable, almost self-policing.
But doesn't that stability itself become a problem? If things get too comfortable, don't people start to question the rigid rules again? Doesn't the fervor fade?
That's exactly the challenge the system faces. Complacency is a threat to this kind of control. So the system requires perpetual crisis.
Perpetual crisis. You mean it needs to keep the fear level high?
Precisely. To stop that loyalty from weakening, to keep people unified against something, the movement must constantly define and redefine an enemy.
Cohesion depends on conflict.
It does. This connects to Hannah Arendt's analysis of totalitarian regime.
Right, she argued they rely on creating enemies.
Constantly. Whether it's an internal enemy, dissenters, minorities, impure elements, or an external one, ideological, racial, whatever, there must be a threat.
Because that threat justifies keeping the whole control apparatus running.
Yes. The surveillance, the censorship, the suppression of dissent, and eventually, often, the justification for violence. It all serves to combat the enemy.
So once that enemy is identified, maybe it's a specific minority group or former members who've strayed.
The next step is dehumanization. It's essential.
Why essential?
Because the ideology of purity established earlier now demands action against the impure. If someone is classified as inferior, unclean, faithless, disloyal,
They're pushed outside that circle of conditional belonging.
and the stage is set for persecution. They are no longer seen as fully human, which makes mistreatment seem acceptable, even necessary.
And the language shifts again, right, from we need to save ourselves to something more like.
We need to cleanse ourselves of them. Religion, race, ideology, these identity markers are weaponized.
They stop being just descriptions and become measures of human worth.
Exactly. Your right to freedom, dignity, even life itself becomes dependent on where you fall on this hierarchy defined by the elite interpreters.
This is where it gets really, really dark. The source talks about moral inversion.
Ah, yes. This is key to understanding how ordinary, decent people can end up participating in terrible things. Systemic oppression, even atrocities.
How does moral inversion work?
It's like the ideology provides this ultimate justification that flips morality on its head. People genuinely believe they're acting virtuously,
So they commit acts we'd see as morally wrong.
but they believe they are defending virtue, upholding a sacred duty, protecting the pure group, or fulfilling a divine mandate.
They aren't acting out of simple malice then.
Often not. They're acting out of what they perceive as a higher duty, a perverted sense of righteousness instilled by the ideology.
They see themselves as the saviors, even as they're acting as the oppressors.
It's a profound form of self-deception, fueled by the system. When you're convinced you're performing an act of salvation, saving the nation, purifying the faith, preserving the race.
It acts like a psychological shield against guilt.
A very powerful one. The language of salvation brilliantly conceals the brutal logic of subjugation.
You're not persecuting innocence. You're acting necessary justice against threats. You're not stripping rights. You're restoring the proper, pure order.
And this mechanism is what allows for mass complicity. It enables widespread participation in systemic cruelty because people feel morally justified, even obligated to do it.
Okay, this leads us to what the Burke analysis calls the most bitter paradox, the ultimate irony.
Right. When these systems fully mature, when they've successfully neutralized their initial targets, the defined enemies, the minorities, the dissenters,
Who suffers most in the long run?
it argues that the most intense, sustained suffering eventually falls not on those initial targets, but on the majority, the very people who were the most fervent believers and supporters at the start.
Wait, hang on. The majority. The ones who bought into the system, who enforced the rules, who surrendered their own judgment, they become the main victims.
That's the argument.
How is that possible? Wouldn't they rebel once the external enemy is gone and they realize they're being exploited?
By the time the system reaches that mature stage, it's often too late. The majority has already given up the very tools they would need to resist.
Their moral independence,
Yeah.
their critical thinking.
Exactly. They've lost their independent political voice. Dissent has been redefined as treason for so long, it's become almost unthinkable.
And economically.
They are often systematically exploited by the ruling elite, the ones whose wealth, remember, was framed as righteous and deserved.
They traded their freedom for the promise of security or purity.
And they ended up with neither. Just a controlled, often impoverished existence where they're expected to remain compliant.
It's the ultimate bait and switch. They gave up their universal humanity for a specific identity, and in doing so, they gave up their leverage, their freedom.
It's a profound betrayal. And this dynamic, the source points out, has echoes in literature, like Orwell's 1984.
The party members, the outer party.
Yes, where the ideological control is so complete that the masses, the compliant majority, actually become the main enforcers of their own captivity.
They police each other, report dissenters, keeping the system rigid long after any real threat or initial enthusiasm is gone.
They become utterly dependent on the elite, on the party, for their understanding of reality itself.
So, looking back historically, the pattern seems chillingly consistent.
It does. Theocratic systems promising salvation, nationalist movements promising liberation, racial ideologies promising superiority.
They all seem to follow this script, evolving into mechanisms of control that primarily benefit a small, insulated elite.
Usually a wealthy elite, yes. The promise of renewal invariably seems to morph into a system of mass control.
The pattern is stark. Subordinate shared humanity to any narrower identity.
And the system eventually turns inward and consumes the very people it claimed it would save. The utopia becomes a prison.
So the big takeaway for us, for you listening, is that the moment any system suggests one group's dignity is inherently less than another's,
Based on belief or race or anything else.
the door is open. The structure is in place for the few at the top to exploit the trust and devotion of the many at the bottom.
It's a structural vulnerability we need to be constantly aware of.
All right, if this descent is so predictable, this pattern so consistent, what's the way out? What's the antidote?
The source material, drawing on this historical analysis, is pretty unequivocal about the preventative measure.
Which is?
That humanity itself, our shared basic existence and worth, must be consciously, deliberately maintained as the supreme moral reference point in society.
Above all else. Above religion, above nation, above ideology.
Yes, it has to be the non-negotiable foundation.
Now, this isn't just about, being generally nice to people, is it? It's a deeper structural principle.
It absolutely is. It's about affirming universal human dignity.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah.
Universal human dignity.
It's the fundamental assertion that every single individual possesses inherent worth. Period.
Unconditionally. Regardless of anything else.
Exactly. Independent of their beliefs, their skin color, their culture, their wealth, their utility to the state. It's intrinsic.
This isn't a new idea, of course.
No, it has deep roots. Thinkers like Kant talked about treating humanity always as an end, never merely as a means. And it's enshrined in modern frameworks like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It's meant to be a universal birthright.
A baseline standard for how we structure society and treat each other.
And the source argues this principle, when truly upheld, acts like a crucial regulator, a check and balance on other powerful forces.
Yes, think of it as the necessary governor on the engine of human passion and identity.
How does it regulate?
Well, it tempers the fervor of religion. It insists that faith must lead to compassion and respect for those who believe differently, not condemnation or coercion.
Okay, and for race or nation?
It moderates the pride. It allows for celebration of culture and heritage, but prevents it from tipping into assertions of superiority or the denial of rights to others.
And critically, especially given our discussion about elites,
It guards against the tyranny of wealth. It makes it clear that material success can never be equated with moral authority or divine right. Economic power doesn't make you inherently better or more deserving of rights.
so when society actually prioritizes this bedrock of empathy and rational respect for universal rights, what happens to diversity? Because these movements often see diversity as a threat.
That's the key shift. When universal dignity is the foundation, diversity stops looking like a problem to be managed or eliminated.
It becomes
A source of strength and enrichment. Our differences in culture, belief, perspective, they become valuable assets, bringing variety, resilience, new ideas.
but only if that base layer of shared human worth is absolutely secure and non-negotiable.
If it's not, if dignity is conditional, then those same differences immediately become weapons for division, exclusion, and building those hierarchies we talked about.
There are leaders who saw this play out firsthand, weren't there? Like Nelson Mandela. He had insights on this.
He did. After living through the apartheid system, a system built entirely on conditional dignity, he understood that freedom isn't just about breaking your own chains.
What else is it?
He said, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others.
So freedom is relational. It comes with responsibility towards others' dignity.
It's a mutual pact grounded in that shared humanity. And the failure to anchor our beliefs, our identities, our systems in that shared humanity
Is what leads, almost predictably, to that moral collapse, that self-subjugation.
Yeah. The measure of a truly advanced or successful civilization, then, isn't how uniform its beliefs are or how pure its population is claimed to be.
What is the measure?
It's the depth of its compassion, the reach of its empathy, and the breadth of its justice, ensuring that dignity applies to everyone unconditionally. That's what protects everyone, including the majority, from eventually falling victim to elite capture. #, conclusion, and outro.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
It's heavy stuff, but crucial.
The core warning, the message from Burke and these historical patterns seems crystal clear.
Yeah. Whenever any specific identity, be it religious, racial, ideological, gets elevated above our shared unconditional humanity.
The end result is almost pre-programmed. The predictable persecution,
Yeah.
eventually, of the many by the few.
That initial idealism doesn't matter in the end. The structural takes over. Wealthy elites inevitably find ways to use that fervor as currency.
Disguising their own power grabs as divine will or patriotic necessity.
And relying fundamentally on cultivating that specific form of ignorance. Trust without verification. Getting the loyal masses to stop thinking critically.
So the antidote isn't necessarily to reject faith or identity altogether. Those things give meaning, culture, community.
No, the argument isn't for rejection, it's for proper placement. Faith and identity must remain subordinate to the higher principle, the universal bond and dignity of being human.
That's the only way, the source suggests, that belief can actually enlighten instead of enslave.
And the only way culture or color can be about expression rather than confinement and hierarchy.
Our moral evolution as societies, then, seems to hinge entirely on our ability to remember this, to hold this line.
To remember that no creed, no race, and no flag can ever stand higher than the fundamental dignity of being human.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty challenging final thought to mull over.
Right. If this mechanism of descent from idealistic unity to authoritarian control is so consistent across history and cultures,
We need to ask ourselves, what movements, what ideas, maybe even seemingly benevolent ones, exist in our world right now that might be subtly setting the stage for this kind of conditional inclusion?
where are we, perhaps without realizing it, prioritizing some narrower identity, a belief, a group, a nation above fundamental universal human dignity? What are we allowing to become more important?
That's definitely something to reflect on. A crucial question for our times.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us and digging into this complex and honestly quite sobering topic.
Thank you.
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable perspective. We'll see you next time.